welcome to the lecture class, folks, at Virginia Martial Arts Center. I'm Hanshi Myers, ready to give you a lecture on one of my all-time favorite topics, my teacher, Shogo Kuniba, also known as Kosho Kuniba. Shogo Kuniba was born in 1935 and he passed away very early in 1992 at the age of 57. And it is a great, great sadness that he passed away at such an early age. I'm sure he had much more to teach us and much more to share with us as far as martial arts goes. But fortunately, for myself and others that were around at that time, we had the opportunity to study under one of the greatest masters of the martial arts of all time. So what I've done is put together a kind of a pictorial, taking a lot of my photos of Shogo Kuniba, putting them together, and just, I don't have a script. I don't have a set thing that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go through some of the photos and just tell you a little bit about his life and what he was like from my perspective. And we do have Mrs. Judy Kuniba, which was his second wife, that is going to be with us on one of the story times and give us more history and more inside stories about him. She's a fascinating person. I've been friends with her for decades, and she continues to support our dojo as well by coming to events and helping us with any activities we want to do in honor of her late husband. So we're going to get right into it. And Shogo Kuniba was, like I said, a great martial artist, but more than that, he was just a fine gentleman. He was a wonderful person. He was a great friend, and he was just somebody very special. He's one of those very special people that could make you feel like his best friend in about 5 minutes after you met him. So in 1935, he was born in Fuji, Yoshida-Shi, Japan, which is a small, at the time, was a small village at the foot of Mount Fuji. And most people throughout their history don't understand that he was raised actually by his uncle, not by his father or by his blood father. His father was actually killed during World War II, and his mother had 3 children. And it was a very tough time. Japan had just lost a war. It was, they had put everything, all their resources into the war effort, and came out of it on the very low side. So it was a terrible time economically. There was very few jobs. There was very little food and things. It was a very tough time for folks. And so his mother, Shogo Kuniba's mother, had to make a decision, and she was having a very tough time after her husband had now died in the war, trying to raise 3 kids. So her, I believe it was her brother, who was Kosei Kokuba, said, "I will take one of the kids," because they could not have kids themselves. He and his wife were unable to have children. And it was kind of a thing that you had to have a child to carry on your name and carry on, your legacy. So he adopted young Kosho Kuniba, and he knew Kosei Kokuba as his father from a very early age. So that's why he was always referred to as his father. As a matter of fact, it was interesting because it wasn't until about 10 years ago that we knew this. It was never mentioned because Shogo Kuniba always referred to his uncle as his father, because that's who raised him. So, moving on from that little story, he began training at the age of 5. And last week, excuse me, we had a nice little talk about his childhood and how tough the training was, and how he had to go up and down the steps of the temple every day on his way to work his school. And after a few years of this, he then had to hop on one foot up the steps and hop on the other foot uh, the other way. So it was tough training. He had to do more than all the other students were expect what was expected of them. He had to do a lot more than that, and that was just the way it was. His father expected him to be very strong and a very good karate man, and so he expected a lot out of him. These two pictures, the first one is from 1952 when he was 17 years old. Now, he got his black belt at 12 years of age. So he was a very young black belt, especially for those days. And the second picture is from 1957 when he was 22 years of age. And understand that in 1956 is when he actually coined the phrase Motobo ha Shitoru, because he had been taught, of course, the Shitoru from Kenwa Mabuni and from Tomoyori Sensei, and he had learned the Motobaha karate from his father and from his father's students and from Choki Motobu himself. So he kind of started putting the two together because that's what he knew. He knew those two types of karate, and he blended them together at a very young age. Unfortunately, his father passed away when he was 59 years old, and Shogo Kuniba was only 24 years old at the time. So he became the Soke of the Station Kai, the name of the organization, and of the style at a very young, early age. And there's a couple of notable poses: his kamae, his ready posture, ready for fighting. And of course, those of you who know Pinan Shodan, you know that pose right there. All right, and here's another Pinan move out of Pinan Yondan, and the Shuto Uke out of course, many of our kata, especially Pinan Shodan. So as he got started to make a name for himself, he was very sought after. People would come to him wanting to learn, but they'd also come to him wanting him to demonstrate his karate. This is a picture of him at the first World Championships where they asked him to do a demonstration of his karate there. And that was quite an honor as he was asked to do that. When he was young, his father sent him to many different types of training, many different karate schools, many other martial arts. He started training in judo, and he trained in judo for 10 years and attained the rank of Sandan, third-degree black belt. And he would have continued in judo, but he was so small that he wasn't good at the competition because others were bigger than he was. And it's one of those arts where you need to throw your weight around, and he didn't have much. He started also at an early age, started training with Kenwa Mabuni, who came over from Okinawa to Japan and stayed with his father for at different periods as he traveled around Japan. And later on, he opened his own dojo. And Soke Kuniba, Shogo Kuniba's actually trained with him at his dojo, at Kenwa Mabuni's dojo. This is a picture from probably about 1955 or earlier, 1950 maybe. And you see the man in the suit is Kosei Kokuba, Shogo Kuniba's father. The man next to him in black is Kenwa Mabuni, and next to Kenwa Mabuni is Shogo Kuniba with his legs crossed. Now, Motoba Hashitoru, like I said, was really the culmination, the bringing together of two main styles, Motobaha Karate and the Shito-ryu of Kenwa Mabuni. And it was an amazing thing to bring together, because you had that fighting style, that really tough system of karate, real hardcore karate of Motobaha, who liked to fight. And he is also famous for the Naifanshin kata, and believing that that was the strongest kata to learn how to fight from. And then you had the Shito-ryu, which was from Kenwa Mabuni, who was like the encyclopedia of kata. He knew so many kata. People would come to him from all styles trying to learn kata. But with his father passing away at such an early age, he had to become a soke at like just a very early time. At 24 years of age, he was the head of this family style. Now, that didn't mean that he knew more than anybody else, because there were obviously other Shihan and students who had been in karate longer than he was. And so even though he was the family soke, the inherited soke of the style, there were other people that were actually more senior than he was in the style. And so what they said was, look, we're going to put the head Shihan in charge of the organization, and you just continue to train and do what you want to do, you know. So we're going to make sure that the organization is run right. You go, and what we'll do is we'll train you to become the soke and the head of the organization and the head of the style as things go on. So that's kind of what happened. So he continued to train. He continued to have a good time and learn karate and get to know everybody and all. He got married to a lady named Kayo, and they had 2 children, which of course were Kozo and Kosuke, who are now the soke of the style. But he was also somebody who just enjoyed life. He enjoyed party and to have a good time with friends and all. But at the same time, he really trained hard. He was a very intense martial artist, to say the least. This is a picture of him in Japan with the swords above his head, at probably right around that 1960 time. And then there's a picture of him probably from about 1982, 83, actually in the United States. Now, Soke also studied many other styles. He was very fortunate to study Iaido, the art of drawing the sword, from the actual head of the system, which was a man named Ichigo Getz. And the Soke would actually come to Soke Kuniba's dojo and give private lessons to him. So he became very good at the sword, and it really was one of, obviously, his favorite weapons. He really enjoyed it. He was good at it. He was, and he enjoyed teaching it. We enjoyed learning it, to say the least. He also went to Okinawa, and he was studying with probably the best Kobudo weapons teacher in Okinawa during those times, and that was Taira Shinken. And he became a Shihan in weapons under Taira Shinken, and taught a great number of weapons and weapon kata and techniques and all, and was very, very good at them as well. In 1957, he wrote a book, and if you think of 1957, he was only 23 years of age at that time. So that was, again, he was always ahead of his time, always ahead of his age, and accomplishing great things. So he wrote this book called Karate Do Benran. Unfortunately, it's out of print. You can't get a copy anymore, and I never got a copy. And besides, even if we got a copy, the whole thing's in Japanese, so it wouldn't do any of us a lot of good unless we can read Japanese. So he continued to train, and the organization continued to grow. The finally in the mid 60s, he was uh, starting to gain a lot of international notoriety, and people were asking him to come to other countries to teach. So, um, one of the things that happened was he would teach at the Air Force bases in Japan. And so a lot of people from different countries, especially from the United States, were there, and they learned the martial arts, and then they kind of spread it around to other places where they would be stationed, and when they would come back home to the United States. So the organization began to grow, and he finally said, "I want to take over," and it was time for him to. So he took over the organization. And became the president of the organization as well as the Soke. In 1970, he made his first trip to the United States and established Seishin Kai in the USA. Um, over the years, it changed directors as far as the people who were in charge of it. And in 1978, I believe it was, James Herndon became the Hombucho, or the branch head for the United States. And he started having Soke come over to the United States for longer periods of time. And Soke enjoyed coming to the US because he could kind of relax and let his hair grow long and didn't have to be such a proper person as far as, actually playing the role of Soke. He could be a little bit more relaxed, and he enjoyed the United States. So he would come over and he'd stay for 6 months as long as his visa would let him. And then he'd go back to Japan for 6 months, and he'd come back for 6 months and go back to Japan. So he really was enjoying the U.S., and James Herndon was very kind to have him stay there in the U.S. And unfortunately, James Herndon was right here in Chesapeake. So that's how I met Shogo Kuniba myself, was through Shion Herndon. Now, in 1983, he decided he was dating somebody here. He was dating Judy Molinari, and he decided to marry her and move to the United States in 1983. And so he became a resident of the USA. And at that time, uh, he he was really enjoying life with Judy, enjoying life with his students and all. And he and Judy had a very nice life together. Now, on October 1st, 1983, he actually opened up a dojo in Churchland on Churchland Boulevard. And uh, that day that he had a big grand opening, and that was the actual poster from the grand opening. I have that in my office. And it was a really great day of demonstrations and parties, and we just had a great time, and it was a great way to start the dojo. And it did quite well. It was a great dojo for many years. It was actually in operation in that uh, same spot for about 13 years until a couple of years after he passed away. He had a tournament every year, and it was the Seishin Kai United States Championships. And these are you'll see some of the awards there. We a couple of years had some very nice awards that were actually handmade awards that looked like the Shinto Torii Gateway, the beautiful trophies. During this time, he was developing the art of Goshindo. And at first it was called Goshin Budo, which meant self-defense martial art. And later he shortened the name to just Goshindo, which meant self-defense art. So being that he was Japanese, and that he followed the Japanese way and the Japanese government and all, he was very fortunate in that they recognized this new martial art as a true martial art, a true new martial art. So they said it was different enough from other things to actually be its own art, its own sophisticated system. And he basically developed it from the combination of judo, jujitsu, aikido, and the karate that he had learned over the years. And because of all the different styles that he had studied, he probably understood the way the human body works better than anyone I've ever met. He understood all the important points on the body, like the pressure points, the weak points, the strong points, and was extremely good at understanding how a person's body would work, and one move would work into another move, into another move, into another move. And he could tie you up in knots in heartbeat, that's for sure. Now, he continued to develop his karate and develop the Goshindo over these times and the years, because especially in the United States, he found that it was very important for the Goshindo style to get out there, because at the time, everybody was teaching bunkai to kata, or the application moves to kata, as just block and punch and kick and block and punch and kick. He took the judo, jujitsu, aikido type of arm locks and holds and throws and takedowns and all, and incorporated it into the basic karate, to where he would say this block is not just a block, it is an arm lock, it is a wrist twist, it is some type of takedown. And people were amazed, because he was really the first to do that. And now it's a very accepted way of doing bunkai, but it really came from him. So he was really the first to do this type of thing. And this really came from the fact that he was working with Americans. Americans were bigger, they were stronger, they were different from the Japanese. And so things that worked on the Japanese people didn't necessarily work on the Americans. And he really had to refine the techniques and change them to adopt to the people. And that's how Goshindo really grew from that point on. Now, because of the popularity of it, and because, people were just amazed by his skill, he started teaching all over the world. And he would be asked to come to many different countries. He traveled to countries like France and Italy and Greece and Venezuela, Mexico, Canada, just India, all kinds of places. And people, no matter where he went, were fascinated by his skill and his knowledge. And his organization grew and grew. He was especially known for his quick kicks. His feet were so fast, he had a nickname of Hebiashi. Hebiashi meant snake foot, because basically his foot moved like a snake. It could come around and hit you from any angle, and there was usually no way to stop it. And as you can see, he could get those kicks up pretty high. On that bottom right photo is one of his signature moves, the flying scissors kick, which he performed extremely well, and did on people, as you can see, right up to that, almost to that guy's upper chest and neck. And Soke was only about 5'4" tall. And this guy was in the 6-foot range. Now, there were many organizations that grew out of Seishinkai. Different people over the years had trained with Soke, and then for some reason or another political reasons, they split off and formed other organizations. So there are more people that say they teach Motoba Hashitaru, or their style has been heavily influenced by Soke Kuniba's teachings. But as of now, the only organization that has the rights to Motoba Hashitaru is Kuniba Kai International. So, but we remain friends with those other organizations and the teachers, and there's always a brotherhood there because we are connected by Shogo Kuniba. This top picture is actually at a tournament in Las Vegas that Soke went to a couple of times. And just showing up, he was treated as royalty and right there with the top people, as he was everywhere he went. And the bottom is actually a class in Japan in the early 70s. Now, one of the persons, one of his students, longtime students, that is a very important figure, is a gentleman named Bill Price. And Bill Price, like I said, was a longtime student of his, and he was the most senior person for at the time of his death. And Soke was kind of messing with the idea of calling his Motobo Hashitoru actually Kunibaha Karate. And because he had changed things quite a bit and had adjusted things and had refined the techniques so much that it was really his personal style. And upon his death, he wanted to make kind of a distinction between the two. And so he named his sons as the Soke of Motobaha Karate Do, but he named Bill Price as the Soke of Kunibaha Karate Do, which was kind of odd, kind of strange, but it was something that we were all very proud of and happy with. Unfortunately, Bill Price did not stay with Seishin Kai and then Kuniba Kai over the years. He actually left and formed his own organization called Chikubukai, which means Bamboo Warrior Association. That's a picture of him on the bottom left. That's more current. Now, back in the 60s, while Soke was still a young man, the person who was in charge of Seishin Kai was named a gentleman named Teruo Hayashi. And he later became a Soke of his own style called Hayashi Hashitoru. But what he did was, when Soke wanted to take over as the president of the organization, he very politely stepped down and said, "You are my junior, so I cannot stay, in the organization because you are junior to me. So I will go off and do my own thing." And Soke gave him his blessing, and they remained friends all throughout time. And Teruo Hayashi and Soke actually performed many demonstrations in which they did many weapons demonstrations, and they always used real weapons. So they used real swords, real kama, and all. They were actually, the two of them were featured in a movie called Budo, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But here you see Soke in the white, Soke Kuniba in the white with the sword, and Hayashi with tonfa. And they did this demonstration quite often. And it was interesting because it was a real sword, real tonfa. And as you can see from the tonfa in this picture, if you look closely, they are all chewed up. And you would actually see, as Soke would come with the sword, Hayashi would block, and chips of wood would come flying off the tonfa as he blocked with them. And so it was the real deal, and it was a very impressive demonstration, and many people loved to watch it. And they'd always ask for them to perform it wherever they were. Some of his other friends in martial arts included some pretty famous people. Tadashi Yamashita, who is has been a movie star for years, and a gentleman named Fumio Demura. Tadashi Yamashita has been in numerous magazines. He's made probably over 100 different movies, including the American Ninja series way back in the 80s. And he's been in movies with Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes, and terrific terrific martial artist. I've trained under him a couple of times at seminars, and he would, after they had gotten together at one of the Las Vegas tournaments, he would come over from California all the way over here for Soke's tournament, and always be there at the tournament. And he would give a seminar or some type of training for us always after the tournament. And fascinating person. And it was interesting because here was this movie star person that, you know, we got to hang out with, but he would follow Soke around like a puppy dog. He really respected Soke tremendously. And then there's Fumio Demura. Fumio Demura was also a great friend of Soke's, and he was the stunt man for Pat Morita in the Karate Kid movies. So he played Mr. Miyagi when Pat had to actually do karate, because Pat Morita, who played Mr. Miyagi, really didn't know karate. But so they got Mr. Demura to do his stunts for him, and it was a very interesting relationship, to say the least. Soke himself was actually a movie star. He had been in about 30 some movies, or excuse me, 22 movies in Japan, utilizing his martial arts skills. And he worked with a lot of people on stunt choreography as well. But here he is dressed up like a samurai in one of the samurai flicks in Japan. And he was featured in what's called Budo. And back when this was released in 1978, it's basically a movie that is like a documentary of the Japanese martial arts. Beautifully done. It won several awards. Won the 1979 Miami Film Festival Award as the best documentary of film of 1978. And later, unfortunately, they changed the title to Budo, the Art of Killing, which just really didn't go over well. And then the bottom picture there with Soke, with the other karate man there, was from a documentary film they did on Seishin Kai in Japan back in the early 80s. And there's again Soke dressed as a samurai. He also was great friends with a gentleman named Sonny Chiba, who was a very famous martial arts actor, and made over 100 movies over his time. And the Street Fighter series was very popular back in the 80s. And Sonny Chiba and Soke got along great, and Soke helped to choreograph several of Sonny Chiba's movies. So he had quite a number of friends and all. One thing you always noticed about Soke Kuniba, he was always dressed immaculately. He always dressed like a gentleman and was always looking dapper, to say the least. He always looked really, really good, and always dressed the part of being Soke. So he was always put across that image, and that portrayed that role of Soke. And Soke liked guns. He liked to shoot. He liked to shoot guns because in Japan, guns are outlawed. So he could come over here and he could learn to shoot guns and all. And he actually got very good at it. He enjoyed hunting when he could. And anytime he could do target practice, was great. Now, one of the things that was interesting was Soke Kuniba's student, Bill Price, was a chief of police department in Bristol, Virginia. And just so happened he had a lot of guns. So Soke liked to go to his house and shoot guns. Another thing Soke liked to do was party. He just liked to have a good time. He loved to entertain people, and he loved to just try out new things, even a big wheel. Okay. So I guess they didn't have big wheels in Japan, but boy, when somebody came up to the dojo and they had their big wheel, he just had to try it. That was always a fun picture there. Love to dance, love to do karaoke, sing, try things, and all. He was definitely somebody who was the life of the party all the time. Something a lot of people don't know is he was also quite an artist. He was very good with what's called shodo, which means the way of the brush. And most people refer to it as sumie, which is black ink drawings. This is one of his famous ones. Well, I say famous, it's one that a lot of martial artists refer to, and it's actually uh, one of his philosophies. So he drew this, and it means to study karate do is to become like bamboo, empty, purity of heart, mind, and spirit, flexible, able to bend when opposed without breaking, strong, character forged with experience, rooted, solid foundation of technique and tradition, straight, clear purpose and growing with high ideals and morals. So that was uh, really his philosophy of life and of karate is, and he felt like karate is very symbolic, or the bamboo is very symbolic of karate training. He also liked cats. In particular, he loved Garfield. Okay. Uh, he loved to draw Garfield, and this is one of his interesting drawings. Okay. And believe me, he had many of them to say the least. But you notice, first of all, he's down at the bottom, he's a fat Neko. Neko meaning what? Cat. Okay. So this is Samurai Cat, and he's saying up top, Toshiro Mifune, eat your heart out. Toshiro Mifune was one of the most famous of the samurai actors that were in Toshiro Mifune was in a ton of samurai movies. And he's just saying, Toshiro Mifune, eat your heart out, baby. He's got the samurai hairstyle, top knot. He's got new shuriken, which are his claws. Okay. And notice that his the samurai sword case, the saya, is hitting the ground, which means it's too wrong, too long. It's supposed to be okay, too wrong. So he got his English wrong. Here's another one. You're gonna like this one too. Okay, so this was almost like an ad for the dojo. Okay, kind of, sorta. So you had a Mai Gaddy with a hip up. Okay, and Yoko Uke, middle block, over on the right there. And it says, go to Seishinkai Dojo. Elbow down, wrist twist, no power, no fingernails. No, don't use fingernails. Hip twist, too much to remember. I'm crying soon. So, again, but you know, you look at it, he wasn't too bad at drawing it. It really wasn't. So he loved Garfield. So he had a funny side to him, to say the least. He was an interesting character and great at a lot of stuff. But he was also great, like I said, at drawing with the brush. And these are just a couple of his kanji drawings here. And the one on the left is kind of the talking about the Motobo Ha and the Shito-Ru Kuniba Ha together. And it actually says Motobo Ha Shito-Ru Kuniba Ha Karate Do. So he was kind of like making all of that one style, you know. So he was kind of toying with what he wanted the name of the style to actually be there. All right. And Soke was also famous in a lot of newspaper articles. There were tons of articles that were done on him. Every time he went to do a seminar somewhere, they'd always have almost always have a reporter there to do an article on him. And he was featured in many, many articles here locally as well. And so famous to the point when he passed away, his passing was on the front page of the Virginia Pilot. So it was quite well known that he had passed away. He was in several magazines, several of the martial art magazines. This was an article article from Karate Kung Fu Illustrated, which was a magazine back in those days. And here was another one on the birth of a new martial art. The article was actually written by James Herndon, but he was the article was about the idea of Goshindo becoming a new martial art. So, like I said, many articles he was in, many articles that were written on him and all. But he was just a fascinating person. His life, he believed in living life to the fullest. And I think he knew that his life would be short because he lived as much life as he could in his short number of years that he was here. And he made sure that everybody knew that this is something you have to do. You have to live life to your fullest. And every year we'd have a birthday party for him. Every year we'd have, and you see kids there. He loved working with kids. He thought kids were great, and he'd act like a kid sometimes himself. And he even enjoyed getting kid-like things, okay, for his birthday. But every birthday we'd also have a big martial arts clinic, and hundreds of people would show up for it from all over the United States, all over the world, have people come from different countries. And it was always a great day, full of lots of learning and lots of camaraderie. And he would have, we had many camps, many clinics, many special times with him and with other people. And we made a lot of friends because of him all over the world. And I have friends in many different countries now because of the martial arts and because of who I was associated with under Shogo Kuniba. I have marvelous memories of him, marvelous times of training, marvelous times working together, times when we would go to lunch and we'd have fantastic conversations and talk about techniques and talk about life and stuff like that. He was really a great father figure to me, as well as a great friend. And he was famous for a lot of different things, especially his flying techniques. He loved to jump in the air and fly at people. And boy, was he good at it. You figure here, that's James Herndon in his earlier years. And Jim Herndon was probably about 5'5", 5'6". So Soke's up there, way up there. Okay. And he was, like I said, he was good at them. He loved to demonstrate them at any time. And this was a picture from the mid 80s when he was probably about 55 years old, still jumping in the air like that. So pretty amazing. Probably one of his most famous poses is, of course, the shutoke and the cat stance. And he was, there are probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures out there in the world of him doing that pose because he loved that particular pose. We often said that Soke had two faces. He had his Soke face, which was that brilliant, beautiful smile that he had. Very handsome man for Japanese especially. And then he had his samurai face. And his samurai face, when he stepped in front of you and he got serious, there was no expression. He didn't look like he was mad. He didn't look like he was mean. He didn't look like anything. It's just this expressionless look. But yet he looked at you and you knew he was confident. He was courageous. He was brave, and he wasn't scared of you at all. And so it made many people quiver in their boots, to say the least, when he looked at you like that, because you knew he meant business. So my time with Shogo Kuniba was very special, and unfortunately, I remember to this day, the day that his wife called me and told me that he had cancer, and we made the best of it. We were very supportive in every way that we could be to help him, and unfortunately, he lost that battle after about a year and a half. But we made sure that he had a good time during that year, as good as possible. And we were just trying to return to him some of the things, wonderful things that he had given to us. And one of the last pictures I had of him is this picture here. I took him to a friend of mine down in North Carolina on the Outer Banks, and we went out in a sailboat. Um, this was in, I think, May of 1992. And we went out in sailboat, and he got to drive the sailboat, and he was the happiest camper you could ever see. He was having a terrific time and enjoyed that. And that really was one of the last times that he got out and all. And unfortunately, he died a couple months later. So he went downhill quickly after that. He's buried here in. He was actually buried here in Portsmouth. Um, he was cremated because that's what the Japanese always do. They always cremate, the body of the deceased. And half of his ashes were taken to Japan, and half his ashes were buried here. But they ended up keeping everything here. That was his request, but they ended up keeping all his ashes here, and he's buried here in Portsmouth, and that's his tomb there, or his gravestone. That's Teruo Hayashi, who was the other Soki that was such good friends with him. And this was 2002 when we had the national championships here in Norfolk, Virginia. And uh, Hayashi came to the championships, and he wanted to see Soki's grave. And he and several of the other Japanese masters that had known Soki, they piled into a big 15-passenger van, and I got to drive them to the gravesite and was honored to be their host for that time, and actually have some pictures of myself and Hayashi together there at the gravesite. And I will tell you that Hayashi shed a tear there. He was very sad that his young friend had passed at such an early time. Unfortunately, Soki Hayashi passed away 2 years after that. And so loss of two great men over the years. And this is Soke Kuniba's belt. This was his very ragged black belt that hardly had any black left on it. And we gave that belt to his son, Soke Kozo Kuniba. And after a few years, Soke gave it back to us. And he said, it belongs in the United States. It belongs with his students. And so myself and Mr. Estes kind of share that belt, and we keep it safe, and it's a very special thing to us, to say the least. And because of you, each one of you, and what we do to teach you, the legend continues on. And every day that you practice, you are continuing Soke Kuniba's legacy, and you continue to keep the style alive. And I appreciate every one of you and what you do, and hope that you will continue and become great in the martial arts yourself one day.